Jewish guy with a lot of tattoos. I got to know. It's very important. You said you're not Adam. Adam Levine, so I got to know what you are.
I know. This was done all in one sitting, drunk in some shithole in South Dakota.
Really?
Yeah. Some dude called Bob, biker, arthritis, drinking whiskey.
How do you know he was going to be able to do
I had no idea.
I'm fucking crazy. Sorry.
Excuse
me. No. I didn't mean to say that, but this guy is out of his fucking mind. Oh, but he's a very good filmmaker. My close friend, Jamal, who we will talk about in a future session when we do chapter and verse, which we haven't really done yet, have we? No. Okay. Yeah. And you have to see it. So yeah. Once you see it, Jamal directed it and wrote it. Jamal was a Black Panther, and Jamal has a Black Panther, and his wife has a Black Panther. I mean, everybody who was a Black Panther has a panther tattooed across their shoulder. It's really cool. I mean, it's nothing else. He doesn't have any other tats that I know of. He's got this big Black Panther running across his back.
Nice.
Two shoulder, yeah.
Yeah, we should bring him in and talk to him.
Oh, we can't. He's in New York.
Okay.
And he teaches at Columbia University, and he's a brilliant guy, and he's writing a script for me and MJ.
Nice.
So it's a very cool story. He's a really good guy, but he's a good guy. We'll get to it.
I haven't seen chapter and verse, but I saw Cabrini.
Okay.
I think it's a good one to talk about, and we have the Elephant Man and Cabrini next to each other.
That's two ends of my career at the moment.
First movie, most recent movie.
Exactly right.
So
but definitely not the last.
Not the last.
I have others to do.
Lots of others to do. Yeah. We still need to do one together.
Yeah. No. That's what I'm saying. That's definitely got to happen. But we'll do. We're going to do a lot of things, but let's
talk about what's going on here, because it's pretty exciting. So this was, we've been talking about this movie for a long time. It's finally out.
You want me to give you a brief history?
Let's do it.
Of the movie?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, back in 2018, I get a call from a friend of mine in New York, a guy named Jeff Sika, who is a money manager. Actually, if you watch Fox News, he's on twice a week or once a week. He does a program on investing, and he represents a lot of capital, and he's someone who was for a long time been a close friend of mine, but has always indicated that he wanted to get involved in making movies and get some of his investors involved in movies, which I always thought was a good idea. It hasn't happened yet. We're hoping maybe the next movie he's going to help me get financed.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm in New York, and I see this guy, and he says, look, I have a friend. This guy is very wealthy. He's in Philadelphia, and he has a movie he wants to make, but he's not a filmmaker. He doesn't know how to make movies. You are the right person to produce this. I said, okay. I said, I'll meet anybody. I don't know. I mean, I said, I'm very busy, but I'm happy to meet him. So a meeting is arranged at the New York Athletic Club. So I am not a member of the New York Athletic Club, and for a very long time, Jews weren't allowed in the New York Athletic Club in New York. I have to tell you, it was a very exclusive, Protestant or Catholic, I get whatever it was. But Eustace, the individual I was meeting, his name is Eustace Wolfington. True name, that's his real name.
So a name you would see at an athletic club.
Well, you might see it in an athletic club. You might see it in a financial, kind of. I don't know. Yeah.
A building.
But on a building.
Wolfington Tower.
Anyway, he was very heavily into automobile sales for his whole career. Owns many dealerships around the country. Has a huge family, and is a good Catholic. Not beyond. I mean, devout, but not crazy,
Yeah.
A good guy. And I meet him in New York, and he wants to make a movie. I said, well, what is the movie? My friend told me you want to make a movie. He says, well, yeah, I'm interested in making a movie about Mother Cabrini. He said, Mother Cabrini, tell me a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I know the name Cabrini. I've seen Cabrini Boulevard in Queens, and there's a Cabrini school in Brooklyn. So I've heard the name, but I don't really know much about her. And he says, oh, she's a saint, and she was the first American saint and was the patron saint of immigrants. I said, okay, that's interesting. He says, yes, and I want to make a movie about her. I immediately stopped him with my eyes, and I basically said, look, I think it's probably a very good idea to make a movie about Mother Cabrini, but I don't think I'm the right guy to do this. I said, I'm not Catholic. It's not my faith. I don't know much about it. But the more important thing for me is I like making movies about real people. As you and I have talked about, I did Francis, I did The Elephant Man, I did Without Limits, which is about a real person. I did Marshall. So I tend to like stories about real people. And I did like that idea. I said, but I like making movies about people that other people can relate to. And I really don't know how to relate to a saint. And he laughed at me and he said, no, you missed the point. I'm not interested in telling about her as a saint. I'm interested in telling about her as a woman. She was a woman who happened to be a nun. But it's not a nun story. It's a woman story. And it's a woman empowerment story. I said, well, why are you interested in it? He said, because she was one of the greatest entrepreneurs in the 20th century. So she did things that, first of all, no woman did, but mostly no man did. I mean, she was quite amazing. And she was a tiny little woman. She was about 5 feet tall, attractive, came to the U.S., had been as a child sick. She had smallpox and she had tuberculosis. And she survived her ailments, but was not expected to live past her teenage years. They said she had a very weak lungs, and it didn't look like she was going to live very long, and she'd probably be stuck in a bed most of her life. Well, she didn't take kindly to any of that or believe it. And she believed that she had a destiny that was beyond being stuck in a bed, and that the only thing that would keep her alive was working and doing good deeds, important things. So she tried to become a nun. She wanted to be a nun. And her family supported the notion of it, but a bit reluctantly, I think, because they were not sure that this was something that would work. And she tried and went to a number of different orders, like the Carmelites and the, Augustines, or whatever the different orders of nuns were. And they all turned her down. They all said, no, you don't have the constitution to be a nun. And so her not believing what she was hearing, decided to form her own order. And she formed an order of nuns, kind of nuns who had been refused by other orders. And she took them in. She said, I'm going to form my own order. And she did. And she lived in Codogno, which was the north of Italy, and she built an orphanage and a school, and she was very active and extremely positive about her ability to help other people, poorer people than herself. Her goal was to be a missionary nun, not to stay in one place, but to move and go to different locations and bring, help to people in areas that really needed it the most. And she had never even been to Rome. She'd only been in the north of Italy, but she kept writing letters to Rome requesting the right to go to China, take a mission to China, a mission of women. Now, at this point in the church's history, and I'm talking about the late 1800s, no woman ran an order. She was like the first. And every other order of nuns was run by men. I mean, the men were the cardinals or abbots or whatever they were ahead of, they ran it, and they would send the nuns to work. She believed that she could do work and wanted to literally go to China. And she went and tried to get the Pope to agree to that. And she was constantly told by the cardinals who she wrote to that this was not going to happen. that she should be happy to stay in her place. She's doing great work and just keep doing what you're doing. But that wasn't her interest. So she finally went to Rome. She wound up being invited to Rome to have her case be heard, even though they already told her when she got there they weren't gonna let her do it. And what was unique about her, and you'll find this throughout the story, was that she never took no for an answer. She was a very feisty, tough-minded woman. And essentially, when a cardinal told her that she couldn't do it and that this was not going to happen and that she should stay where she was, her comment to him and to many other people in other hierarchies was, is that your opinion or is that the Pope's opinion? And of course the cardinal would say, well, if I'm saying it to you, it's the church's opinion. It is definitely the Pope's opinion. That's what she says. Well, if it's all the same to you, I'd like to hear it from him. And she would find a way to get to the Pope. Pope was told what she would, and met her, but she was very persuasive when she met him. And he was dealing with issues of immigrants from Italy who had gone to the U.S. thinking that they were going to have their lives made for them, that it was going to be gold in the streets, and it wasn't. And they were living in
very
horrible circumstances. Yeah. And he had a lot of complaints and people writing to the church. And although she wanted to go to China, he said, look, I'm willing to let you do this, but if you start in
go west first.
Don't go east.
Yeah.
He says, and she had said, she believed that what she wanted to do was bigger than the world. So he says, well, if it's bigger than the world, then it doesn't really matter where you start. Go to New York. And he sent her to New York, and she wound up going with a bunch of nuns to clean up the slums and help the Italian immigrants in New York City. And that's where she started. Anyway, that's the beginning of the story.
And that's pretty incredible. Like some of that, the later stuff that you were saying is in the movie. The earlier stuff, it wasn't. So it's nice to hear that and, kind of get an understanding of her forming her own order and all that. And then, long story short, she comes and dominates and builds the biggest chain of children's hospitals and orphanages ever
in the world. Right? In the whole world. I mean, she built almost 67 separate institutions. I'm talking about major hospitals, schools, orphanages all around the world, not just in New York. But our story in this movie is an origin story. We realized very early that we couldn't tell. If we wanted to tell her whole life story, it would have taken 10 hours. So it would have to be a mini-series. And we were looking to make a feature. And we realized that what we could do best would be to tell the story of her embarking for the U.S., doing the first things that she did, which were in New York City. Everything she did after that was modeled after what she started doing. So it's not as if it was terribly different. It was the same kinds of things, but she did it in other places.
Did Eustace already have an idea about which part he wanted to make?
No, he didn't. He just knew. I mean, the thing that happened with him, and I'll give you a little bit of history on him, is that he had funded a movie maybe 15 years ago called, or 10 or 15 years ago called Bella, which was a small little $3 million movie shot in New York. And he funded it himself. And the movie was a good little movie, but they basically four-walled it. They played it in theaters and took it around. And it ultimately made its money back and made a little bit of a profit. But it was a very hard process, which any time you fund a movie and try to do it yourself in all ways, it's going to be difficult. He really wasn't interested in making movies. That was not, he had a business and he was kind of, talked into doing this movie at that time. He wasn't interested in doing movies generally. But he had done this one movie and he was a big supporter of Mother Cabrini. He loved her thinking. And the nuns from the Cabrini order knew about the fact that he really loved her and, took her as his personal saint. And they kept coming to him saying, you should make a movie about her. You should. And he said, thank you, ladies, but I'm not going to make a movie about her. He says, I'll support the charities, but I'm not going to make a movie. And they just kept they like
Oh,
Mother
so it's really the
Cabrini
nuns that got
kept
him
knocking on the door saying, you really should do this. You really should do this. And he really didn't want to do it. But ultimately, he decided one way or another, he came around to the point where he said, okay, maybe I should tell her story.
Yeah.
And as I said, she had a lot in common with the way he thought about life, the way he thinks about life. He's not a young man. He's in his 90s now, but he's still very active. And what he's known for, Eustace is that he created the car lease. No one leased cars before him. And he invented the whole process of leasing cars back in the early 60s, I think. And it took him
Smart guy.
10 to 12 years to get any of the major car companies to believe in the idea, because they all said, no, leasing, people don't want to lease, people want to own. And he kept saying, yeah, but you drive a car off a lot, and if you drove it right back on after you buy it, it's worth 20% less. It makes no sense. If you lease a car, you can change it every year. You can have the newest car. Anyway, he figured out, and he figured out all of the information for leases, couldn't sell it. And the story he told me was that's how he got to know Mother Cabrini. He was in church one day with a friend of his, and he had just about decided to give up the idea of trying to sell leases because it was just too hard. No one was interested. He was making plenty of money selling cars anyway, so it wasn't like he needed the money, but he just thought it was a good idea. Anyway, there was a statue behind him in church, and he asked his friend, he said, who's that? And the guy said, well, that's Mother Cabrini. And he said, really? He said, yeah. He said, well, who was Mother Cabrini? He said, well, she was this woman who came over, became a saint later, but she came over to the U.S., and she never took no for an answer. He said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, she always realized that in every hierarchy, there's a lot of people in the middle who can say no, but if you can get to the person who can say yes, maybe you can make something happen. So she always operated on that principle.
So he almost took it as a sign.
He said, well, that's interesting. He says, I was just about to give up this thing. I'll give it another few weeks. And literally 3 weeks later, he sold his first lease. And within 6 months, he sold every major car company his plan for a lease, which he wound up getting a royalty on or whatever. He went from being a multimillionaire to a billionaire overnight because of this thing that everybody uses today. They still use Eustace's math and his plan for leasing. So he was the guy who did this.
I can see why he
and he said, look,
felt strongly about Mother Cabrini.
But the word was out, and the nuns found out, and they wanted him to make this movie. So, as I said before, I came into the process. He met me. He convinced me that it was a story that would be interesting.
So
to tell.
at what point during him, kind of rambling on about this stuff, were you like, okay, I think I might do?
Well, it was after the call. I mean, after the lunch that I had with him, I was still not sure, and he sent me a bunch of books to read. And there were books about her, and she was fascinating. She was really, I was looking at her as a woman, not as some spiritual deity, but really just as a woman who was working to figure out ways to get things done. And I really liked her approach. I looked at the way her educational philosophy was very, very modern. It was very child-centered. She didn't believe you bring the word down to children. You start with the child and you find out what they're interested in, and then you use that to
Montessori
build them.
almost.
Yeah, it was in a way. But I mean, she was very child-centered, and all of her thinking was really, really modern in what we think of as educational philosophy today. Same thing in medicine and everything that she did. So she was a very a thinker, modern thinker, and a futurist in a way. She knew she could see the way things were going, and she tried to make things better for as many people who had less resources and no help, and that was her plan. And she did an amazing job. I mean, the idea of being a saint is something that happens after you die and all of that.
Yeah.
Our story is not about that at all. It's really just about her early life and how she operated as a very intelligent, very entrepreneurial woman.
Now that it's all said and done, is Eustace happy with what you did?
Eustace is very, very happy with the film. He loves the film. He believes that 100 million people should see it.
The reviews are incredible.
He wants to get it around the world. He's extremely excited about it. He's very happy with the way it's turned out. So am I.
I think the IMDb score was like 8, which is insane.
Yeah.
After about 2,500 reviews, which usually it starts high, but then it starts going down.
No, we've had really good, very good response. And the negative response that we've had tends to be more about the distribution company.
So Angel Studios distributed
Angel
it.
Studios
Now they're known for The Sound of Freedom. That's what kind of put them on the map, right?
Yep.
Now the director is the same director from Sound of Freedom, but it's not a religious film, and it has nothing to do with any politics in that sense. So you're getting negative feedback, not on the film itself, but on just people who haven't watched the movie that want to just shit on it.
I think a lot of it comes from The Sound of Freedom. I mean, although the movie did extraordinarily well, and that is probably a good thing for us because the company believes in their ability to get people to see their movies, it is nothing like this movie. And I had nothing to do with that movie, although many of the people who worked on Cabrini also worked on Sound of Freedom. But aside from all of that, Angel Studios is a bit of an outlier. They're not a major in this context. They work differently. They're very social media oriented. They know how to use social media, I think, better than the major studios. And their whole plan of operation tends to be quite different. And we're also at a time, as you know, we're only 2-3 years out from the pandemic. Not even, about 2 years since the pandemic was really gripping the industry completely.
And we had strikes too.
Well, but the strikes, true, that's an important aspect now. But I'm talking about when we made the movie, which was before the strikes, we were in the midst of the pandemic. And during the pandemic, there was no theatrical distribution at all, nothing. So, and it was a lot of people in our business believed that it would never come back, that the only movies that were going to be distributed in major theaters were going to be Marvel type, space operas or comic books or big action films, and ones that had sequel potential and all that kind of thing. So that those would be the movies that did get theatrical distribution. Everything else would probably wind up on platforms such, other streaming platforms.
Just for those who maybe might not know, theatrical release is critical to the recouping of a budget generally.
Yeah, well, it is.
It's a higher budget film.
It is generally, yeah. I mean, and not to say that you can't recoup your budget from streaming if the movie is never released theatrically or has a very minor release theatrically, but because theatrical release costs a lot of money, but it also has the opportunity to bring in a lot of money. And certain movies like Cabrini, unusually, is a movie that really works best in a big theater. You want to see it. It has a size to it that is not TV size. It doesn't mean you can't show it on a small screen or on your phones.
Yeah.
But the fact is, the best experience is going to be in a big theater.
Yeah.
We really were hoping we would get a theatrical release, but we had no guarantee when we made the movie that would ever happen. And Eustace was thinking of he was already talking directly to streamers to see whether maybe that's the way you put the movie out. And when Angel came along, they wanted to open the movie in close to 3,000 theaters. Now that's
this is
completely unheard of now. I mean, that might have been the plan 10 years ago, but as of the pandemic, no one thought that a one-off movie, dramatic movie that doesn't have sequel potential, doesn't have big action and no major stars, for that to get a theatrical release, very rare, almost
maybe
impossible.
Limited in some way, but they're talking about as big a release as any film.
Any movie out there.
Yeah.
So we believed in them, the company, and they believed in us.
Were they the first studio to talk to you and just to bit right in, or did you try and
we
shop it around?
We spoke to Universal, we spoke to Sony, we spoke to Lionsgate.
And
We
did they
had
all sort of say-
potential. No, we had potential offers for distribution, but it was very limited. It was they weren't going to put a lot of print and ad money in. They were going to see how the movie did and then decide whether they wanted to spend more money. Angel was the only studio only place that came to us and said, "We believe in this movie. We want to release it everywhere, and we really want to, we will stay with it, and we will really roll it out properly."
So
And we
are
believed
they
it.
putting in the marketing budget?
Well, they are. They're putting in most of the marketing budget. A lot of the marketing budget is being rolled over from
The revenue.
the revenue that comes in from the release, so they keep it going. We're now 2 weeks out, and we've already made about $15 million, and we are, the theaters that we have are staying with us, and hopefully we'll be running through Easter, and I imagine that might give us a little bit of a boost. I know most people, regardless of the fact that I and others say that the movie is not a religious film, which it is not, it is called Cabrini, and it's about Mother Cabrini. So the religious audience is believing that, and they're going to go to it anyway,
Right, and they can read into it what they
Yeah.
what they want, and I mean, if it gives them that value, then that's great, and you kind of satisfy.
It's an odd thing, too, about a movie like this, because it is a movie that we intentionally did not make into a holy, praying kind of a movie. Not to say that we're against any of those
No,
things.
in fact, she's kind of more of a hustler herself. She doesn't spend a lot of time asking for help. She
She figures out ways to do it. Now, some of the criticism we've had, aside from the angel issues, which we have no control over, is the fact that the heavily religious people think it's not religious enough. Why doesn't she pray to God more? Why doesn't, look, how one prays and what one does in a 2-hour movie is not, you can't possibly show her whole life. And we decided not to rely on her moments of
I wouldn't have added
of
anything.
faith. We didn't think that was, the fact that it's a known fact as a human being that she was a woman of faith, and she believed in God, and she it was part of her life in every aspect of her life, but it wasn't something that we had to lean towards in terms of the story, because what was interesting about her was how she managed real humans in the real world, not about supernatural.
And I have something to say to people who say that, and because I think that whether it's Christian or other faith-based movies or content, you're only going to preach to the choir. So if you wanted a movie about Cabrini that 5 people in your close circle are going to see, great, then you could have done a religious piece. But the whole idea is, in my understanding, even in Christianity, but especially in Judaism, is to put good things into the world. That's the holy deed, is actually putting action into play. Whether you're doing what the motivation is isn't as important. It's not about praying and piety or whatever it's called. It's about doing stuff. And this woman did stuff, and
You believe that, and I believe that, and I think a lot of well-meaning people do believe that your actions speak louder than your. It doesn't. Again, you can pray because it's you, and I am all for prayer. I think it's prayer.
Yeah, it's like
meditation, and all of those things are great for your soul. But in order to work in the real world, you have to get out there and you have to get your hands dirty. And she did that.
Yeah.
This was a woman. When I say she got her hands dirty, she really went to the places where other people wouldn't go. She went into the sewers to bring kids out of the sewers. She
digging for water.
She figured out every which way to make it possible to get money to support her efforts. And it didn't just come from her sitting in a corner and praying for it. She may have done that. I'm sure she did. But she also did practical things that worked.
Yeah.
and she found ways to make things work.
And that's what the world needs, is to be inspired. That was the point of this movie, right? And for you, at least.
Well, those were the things that inspired me. The things we're talking about are exactly the things that inspired me to want to make this movie.
Yeah.
And in an interesting way, we all felt, and this may be the religious side, but all of us who worked on the movie felt that Mother Cabrini was watching us in a way, because we all felt that we were doing that work because we believed in the story. We believed in what she was able to do. And I mean, just to go a little further for people who don't know anything about it, Mother Teresa, who is much more well known in our current time than Mother Cabrini is, basically based her entire sisterhood on Mother Cabrini. Mother Cabrini was her heroine.
Yeah, I was going to ask
this
about
was the
that.
person that she spoke about as being the woman who inspired her to become the selfless woman that she became. So it is kind of
knows
interesting.
about her, which is great. What a great thing to bring to highlight a person like that.
Well, look, the story to me was a great story. There are a lot of aspects to making it, which we haven't yet talked about, but we should, which were challenging and interesting. But a lot of them had to do with the fact that we were making a movie during the pandemic. Everybody who was on the movie had to be vaccinated every day. We had to have tested every day and vaccinated again, or having a special test once a week. We couldn't have strangers on the set wandering around, or guests, because you just couldn't. I mean, you didn't want to get anybody sick. Mm-hmm. The actors themselves had to wear masks until they were actually performing, and then they took the masks off and they did their performance, and then they put them back on. But it was, in terms of what the on-set behavior was, very, very quiet and very protected. And that was an unusual thing, not always the way it is on movies. There were a lot of things that happened as a result of the pandemic that I contend were kind of unintended positive consequences. And I'll give you an example of one. I mean, we were making this movie and we had to figure out where to make it. I had made a movie, Marshall, in Buffalo. And I had a great experience in Buffalo, New York. It was really a terrific place to make a movie. And
why?
Well, because the film office is terrific. The local atmosphere is very pro-film. They do everything they can to help you. The film office, is, I would say, arguably the best film office in the country. I mean, they are people who really, when you call them in advance and you tell them what you want, they'll provide scouting for you free. They'll provide hotels for you, everything to make you want to come up there. Yeah. Number one. Number two, for Marshall, it was because we needed the main location for Marshall was courtroom. We needed a courtroom that was built in the 1920s or 30s that we could have full time. Very hard to find. That's a very difficult thing to find. Courtrooms tend to either be in operation or they tear them down. They don't hang around.
For them.
Empty courtrooms aren't around that much.
Yeah.
Well, it just happened that in Buffalo there was a federal building that had 3 courtrooms in it that they were about to tear down, and it was built in the 20s. And when we found out that was happening, we said, "Don't tear it down, at least not yet." And they said, "No, we're not sure what we're going to do with it, but we're not planning to keep it the way it is." And they allowed us to use it, and it was the main location for probably a third of the movie, so it was a big deal. Well, having had that experience and having worked up there, I also knew another thing about Buffalo was the fact that the steel industry and many major heavy industries were in Buffalo and all left in the 80s and 90s. They all left the city, and the city was really bereft. I mean, it was
it's like a Detroit
labor
situation.
Very much so. The labor market had plummeted. People didn't have jobs. It was not a great place to be in the 80s and 90s. And it had come back now pretty much as an art colony, and now it's recovering and recovered quite well, but you still have all these old shells of carcasses of old buildings. You have all of these old warehouses that are brick. They're red brick, just like the buildings in New York City, but they're empty. There's nothing in them. So we wound up using them as the exterior because we had to build the 5 Points section of New York City, which really doesn't exist anymore. It was in Gangs of New York that Marty Scorsese made. He built 5 Points in the late 1700s. He built that in Raleigh because it didn't exist in New York. When we went to New York, we saw, of course, it didn't exist. There was nothing left. We were dealing with it 100 years later. So using an old set wasn't going to work for us. We had to find a way to build it in the 1890s, and the locations that we found in Buffalo made it perfect to do. And we didn't use a lot of visual effects. We basically built a real set, exterior set, for the whole 5 Points area, where we filmed a good number of several weeks. So it was great.
Nice. And the whole film was shot, except there's some that you shot in Italy, right?
The whole film, except for about 6 or 7 days, were shot in Buffalo. In Italy, we had to shoot aspects of the Vatican.
Well, you couldn't build the Vatican in Buffalo?
Couldn't build the Vatican in Buffalo, and you couldn't, you couldn't find that kind of those kind of locations. But we found we also needed a nunnery. I mean, basically a convent, and we found a convent that was perfect in Italy.
Was great for that, yeah.
So we found a convent in Rhodes and stuff like that, and we were able, and so we did those sequences in Italy, but everything else was done.
Where'd you shoot the when she walks into Parliament or whatever?
Well, strangely enough, we were thinking of shooting that in Italy because we didn't know we'd find it. We actually found it in the Congress in Buffalo.
Oh.
In their main federal building, actually at City Hall, there's that's the literal place, seat of government for Buffalo, but it was built a long time ago, and it's with a few minor changes, taking away a couple of modern conveniences, we found it right there in Buffalo.
That's great. So if Scorsese's watching, don't feel bad. You could have just gone to Buffalo for Gangs of New York, but didn't know it at the time. Yeah. So you flew to Italy and spent a bunch of money.
Spent a lot of money. Yeah.
So what else is unusual? This is a very unusual film in many ways. It was kind of an unlikely hero in so many ways, right? And the fact that it's performing is great. But what else was kind of weird or unusual?
Let me give you a few things. One was that if this movie had been made by a major studio, almost certainly they would have required us to have a lead who was a famous woman. And we did, we talked about people like Lady Gaga or people like Natalie Portman or other major actresses who could play Cabrini. But what we realized very early on was that we needed someone who was fluent in Italian, also spoke English, could handle, that transition from Italy to the U.S. and make it all believable. And we really realized, I think, in the early days of casting that we had to hire somebody from Italy. And our casting director was a big proponent of that. She kept telling us that, we can find somebody in Italy, and she had made a lot of inroads with local casting directors in Italy, and basically came out with a number of people that we interviewed and saw.
Were you gauging their success in Italy as part of it, or was it more about the performance and the quality of the person?
Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, you gauge their success only because you want to see that they performed in a movie or a television series that you can see, that you and that you can see. I mean,
but it's not so much about the eyeballs that they're.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't about their popularity as a performer that was going to make the difference, because whoever they weren't going to sell tickets just based on their name. The movie had to do that. Without, the movie had to be the engine, not the star. And if I've learned anything in the world of independent filmmaking, it's dangerous sometimes to think that a star is going to make the difference. A star will make the difference perhaps in getting you some sales, but it also may hurt you in other ways. If they become too familiar, if you're very familiar with someone in a role that you...
Well, that was your predicament with the elephant.
Yes,
Man.
exactly.
You didn't want to see an actor through the mask.
And in this particular instance, it wasn't quite the same, but we needed an Italian actress, and we saw this actress who had a fair amount of success in Italy. She'd been in a series, a major series called Gomorrah, which is huge in Europe, and she had been a star in that series. So it wasn't as if she hadn't done anything before. But we also have another Italian actress named Romana, who wound up being the prostitute in the movie. She's fantastic.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
And she also came from Italy.
Okay.
The little boy who plays
Opening scene.
Paolo, he's in the opening scene and he's all through the movie. Also a well-known Italian actor. Giancarlo Giannini played the Pope. So we had
He was great.
a lot of Italian actors, in the movie. And we had to find them and cast them. I mean, they weren't the people that everybody knows when you're looking for somebody. So it was a challenge. But casting was fun because although we did have a few actors who were pretty well known, people like John Lithgow and David Morse, everybody was of the same level. They were all really, really solid actors, even in the smaller parts.
Yeah.
The Doctor, Patch Darragh.
No, you're right. I'm thinking like usually in a movie, there's sort of one or two where I can be like, they kind of threw that one in there, but yeah, not here. They really,
I think everybody was really good. The reporter, another, terrific actor.
Yeah.
So we had very good, even performances across the board, and I think that was very important. What I was going to say to you before was that one of the unintended consequences was when we went to scout in Buffalo. I mean, we had looked at other locations. I suggested Buffalo because I knew it, but I didn't want to make a demand for it. I wanted the director and the production designer and the cameraman to really believe that was the best place to make it. I thought it was, but I needed them to see it. So we did a scout. We went to New York City first, and then we went up to Buffalo. And we brought the cameraman from Spain, and our production designer was from Mexico. So we brought them with us. Now, we were right in the middle of the pandemic. In order to get them there, they had to get cleared health-wise.
Right.
And they had to take all kinds of tests, and they finally get to Buffalo. We do a scout to pick our main locations. The idea normally would have been send them home. We did bring the cameraman in for a few days. Now we'd bring him back 2 weeks before we were ready to shoot, or even less, and just have him, work with his crew and all that. But we were in a circumstance where we couldn't send him back home, because if he went back home, he wouldn't be able to get back that easily. We'd have to go through the whole process all over again.
Yeah.
So we decided we were maybe 6 weeks out or more. We said, we got to keep these guys here. So we kept our crew with us. And the unintended consequence was that our cameraman and our designer and our director could spend a full day or two at each location and plan out every shot and figure out what they were going to do
super helpful.
Way in advance of
great.
shooting. So by the time the rest of the crew came in, when we were ready to go to a location, we knew exactly what we were doing. We didn't have to find
a very
it.
efficient shoot.
We did it. The shoot was ready. We knew what we were shooting, and the only people who were new to it were the actors. Now, the other interesting fact about that is that, sometimes you work on a movie and you're working with actors who are tend to like to find the scene on the location. They have it in their head. They know what the scene is, but until they actually see the environment, then they decide where they want to be and how to use the environment. Well, we didn't have that advantage in this movie because everything was laid out for long, expansive dolly shots and movements, and everyone had to be in very specific places. So we had to figure out the blocking before the actors even got there. This is unusual and not always recommended. I mean, if you're working with a lot of method actors, they're going to give you a hard time, and they're going to say, no, I wouldn't say that over here. I want to be standing by the table. Well, you can't stand by the table. You have to find a reason to be over here because that's where the camera's going to be.
Yeah.
Well, what you do find, though, is that actors who have been theater trained, and it turns out John Lithgow is a theater trained actor, David Morse is a theater trained actor, Christiana Delana is a theater trained actor, Jeremy Bobb, who played the reporter, theater trained. So all of these people have worked in theater, and they understand the fact that if you're on a stage, you have to be in the light. If the light is going to be over here, you have to be here. So you can't.
So you just have to put lights where you want it.
But you can't play your scene. Right. You can't come onto a set in a theater and decide you want to play the scene to the back wall because no one will see you. So you have to be. You have to have a reason, emotional reason, to make it right for you to be where you need to be.
Okay.
But there's no question that you don't have to be in the light. Well,
that's interesting.
It was the same situation with us. The actors couldn't change the blocking, the basic blocking. They had to be where they were supposed to be, but these were actors who were very comfortable doing that and making it feel completely
I like that. So
real.
they kind of embrace the idea of, okay, I need to find a reason to be over here, and just use their creativity to do that.
And in this particular instance, that's what it was. If you notice and you look at the movie carefully, you see the movie does not have a lot of traditional coverage. There's not. Normally you do a television movie and you shoot a master and then you shoot an over-the-shoulder and an over-the-shoulder and a single and that's it. You cover it every which way.
Yeah.
We didn't have any coverage, so that every long shot included the close-ups. They were part of the shot. But,
did you have an editor on set with you? Or
we didn't have an editor the whole time on set, but we did have an editor who came out, spent time with us. But because so many of the shots were like mini plays, like you do a shot, you'd actually plan out the shot for half the day. In the second half of the day, you'd shoot it, and that was it.
Yeah.
And you didn't go in for coverage, and you didn't make any changes. The whole shot was the whole scene. Now,
that's risky.
The bad thing about it is it's very risky because if it doesn't work or the timing is wrong, there's nowhere to cut. You can cut the head and tail of it, but that's it.
We had that very issue on a small movie I did a few years ago. There was just one scene, everything was coverage, and there's one scene where we said, no, this is going to be our one shot. Like, this is going to be like a 6-7 minute oneer, and it's going to be perfect. And it did, while we're on set, the same thing, you rehearse it, you block it, you do it a few times, then you shoot it. Great, in the can, got it. And then when we were editing it, it was just, how do we chop this scene out? It just didn't work in the movie.
Well, again, that's a matter of trust and luck. And in this particular instance, I have certainly been on movies, have made major studio movies, where you get notes from the office back in Hollywood saying, no, I don't care if you love the shot, go in and get a single, get some coverage, because if the director's idea doesn't work out, we have to have something we can cut to. Well, we didn't. We literally relied on each other, and I had to take the risk most of the time of knowing or feeling that it was good.
That's where because you're the type of producer who's held the boom mic and done all the tasks. And you've done a lot of movies, so I think in your case, you can trust your judgment a little bit more.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that I didn't have sleepless nights thinking, gee, did we get the coverage? I mean, what do we cut to if it doesn't work?
Yeah.
I mean, the other good thing was that we had a terrific editor, and he was able to make magic even from shots that
were there some areas?
There were ways he could fold a shot into another shot that you didn't even see the glue and the metal. You didn't know what he was doing, but it all looked like a continuous moving shot, and it really wasn't. There were a lot of, not a lot, but there were a few times that did happen in the edit, and we were able to make adjustments that really worked. But in general, it was a very theatrical type. I mean, the movie that our director had us all watch before we started, actually the day before we started working, he got a print of Citizen Kane, and we all watched Citizen Kane. And Citizen Kane is shot that way. There's very little coverage. All of the shots are, these moving, beautiful, incredible shots, and they tell the story. This particular movie was shot in that same style, I would say.
I have a friend who shot the entire movie in one shot. It's called The Circle. Not a particularly mind-blowing film but an interesting idea. And it was very complicated.
Well, I mean, there have been a few movies like that. But the thing about it is, I mean, if it's just employed as a trick, then it's a trick.
But this really made the whole thing more special in many ways. It doesn't really feel like a regular movie than when you see it that way, because you're not just cutting from.
No, and I mean, it is. We didn't do it. We didn't do it as some kind of elaborate magic trick. We did it because the movie lent itself to that kind of operatic movement.
That, and I'm sure that at times, maybe I'm wrong, you just didn't have a choice because of you're building it's a period piece, and that there's a thing I saw an interview with, I don't know who it was, Roger Deakins or something, where some guy in a Q&A is asking him, well, how did you decide to center the actor as you're going through this thing? And it's like, well, because there is a light over here and a door over here, so we didn't have.
That's what we did.
That's what we did.
Well, I mean, one of the great ones is what is it? 1917? Was that the movie that? I think Roger Deakins shot it, and it was the movie that it's World War I, and the whole movie is literally looks like it's one shot. It's not. I mean, but it's done in such a way that it feels
seamless,
totally seamless. Other movies that are more like that, I think, are Rope, which was the earliest one, which was done by Alfred Hitchcock, is literally a movie that is. I think there are 3 shots in the whole movie. And the joins are completely hidden, but it was done that way.
What's that future the dystopian films, Children of Men or something like that? That's also very.
Yeah, I mean these are interesting, complicated. It takes a lot of preparation to do that kind of thing. But when it works,
that beautiful benefit of having your cinematographer there for 6 weeks.
We had. I mean, it was a tremendous advantage because we really were able to plan out things that we would have had to rush plan, and it would made it easier on the whole crew because our key grip and our lighting guy came in. We could show them exactly what we were aiming at, so that there wasn't any, heavy discussion about it. We knew pretty much what we wanted, and it tended to work. So this was a very lucky.
And not having a studio there, kind of looking over your shoulder.
Well, there wasn't anyone to tell. That's the big thing. There wasn't anyone to tell us that we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was good on the one hand, and the hard part on the other hand is there's no one there to backstop you either.
Yeah, but you
have to backstop yourself.
When people, right? But that's I mean, if you don't put it all out there on a film like this, I mean, you could have ended up with a good movie.
Yeah, would have been a different movie.
Yeah, it would have been different. Just play it safe. But I think all these risks really paid off. And the Academy Awards, they might be a little political and all that stuff, and who knows? But I feel like this is it's up there with the best films.
I agree. No, I think it is too. I think technically it's a beautiful film. I think the performances are all great. I'm very proud of it. There are a lot of things in addition to the things that normally happen on set. In most movies, for example, you make the movie, and then you look at the movie, and then you bring in a composer and you hire him after the fact, and he takes a look at the movie, or she or whoever it is who's doing it, and then they write the music, and you have the music for the score. In our case, there was a lot of music in the movie as we went along. We had an opera singer, we had an opera, we had a singer in the park.
Wasn't Andrea Bocelli's daughter in it?
Yes.
Yeah.
We had Andrea Bocelli's daughter, and she has to sing. We had, kids singing. All this stuff was going on. So we hired our composer before we started, and he was part of our team. So he actually came up to Buffalo, and he recorded certain sections of the movie very early. He didn't do the whole score before the movie, but he did write some of the main themes and all the Italian songs that were in the movie, and other things that you don't even think about that are part of the process. We had the guy to do it, and he was terrific, and he was totally, he's not the most well-known composer at this point, but he's won some major awards before he did it, and he did a sensational job.
I'd be surprised if he doesn't at least get recognized for this too.
Yeah, and he wrote a song that came out of the music from the movie that is sung by Andrea Bocelli and his daughter in the end credits.
Yeah.
And that was a terrific thing to happen.
Yeah.
But and it's a beautiful song. So I think we have high hopes. But in the meantime,
it's in the box office. It's making money. People are going to see it.
It is.
The reviews are incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we'll see where it goes from here. But you're about to release it in South America. I think
it's
now,
being
right?
released in Mexico this week, and in London, and in it'll be released in Mexico and Italy in May, and pretty much the rest of the world over the next few months.
I think for filmmakers all over the world, I'm hoping that this film more than recoups his budget, because that is just another testament to, everybody always says, oh, you can't sell a drama, not with no actors in it. Not, that's impossible, especially if it's over 5 million, 10 million, 20, whatever. You can't make that money back. Well, let's see. It's looking like we will be able to.
I think we will. And I think, it's great because I understand you could probably do a drama that Steven Spielberg directs and that, has Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and you put everybody together, and maybe you can, you make something that everyone will go see and it can be successful. But it's kind of interesting to have an outlier like we are, because it doesn't have major people in any real major category, and yet I think it passes the test of being a movie that is artistic and well thought out, and
beautifully
makes
shot.
me very happy. Makes me happy to be part of it. I really do enjoy it.
And again, it's not the type of movie I see. None of your movies are the type of movie I see. But every time I watch one, right? But then you see it and you're like, holy shit, this is really good. It's moving, it's a good film. It makes you feel stuff, which is kind of hard. It's good these days. So
I enjoy it.
Yeah.
All right, man.
All right. Let's do another follow up one when
we'll do another one later on this
when it's tripled its budget. All right.
Thank you,
Congrats.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. We were very close to a lot of the people who were originally on the track team. In fact, Phil Knight, who was the owner of Nike and created Nike, was on that team. He was one of the guys. It was amazing because we filmed in Bowerman's actual house. When we were there, everywhere you looked from his house, he owned.
He just bought the
whole view.
I'll stay here, but I'll buy it.
But he bought everything around him. I mean, he really became quite wealthy, and that was the place.